meet Mr. and Mrs. Bloggs. They own their family home, and they naturally envisage that their two adult children, Jack and Jill, will benefit from the house or its value once they have gone. They make standard wills, leaving everything to each other in the first place and then to the children thereafter. When Mr. Bloggs passes away, Mrs. Bloggs becomes the sole owner of the house. Several years later, Mrs. Bloggs remarries to a Mr. Young. Unaware that this marriage avoids her previous will, Mrs. Bloggs never writes a new one. When she unfortunately passes away before her new husband, Mr. Young inherits the property. Jack and Jill receive nothing. Now, let's consider the same scenario where Mr. Bloggs passes away first, but this time, after Mrs. Bloggs marries Mr. Young, they decide to sell their existing properties and invest their funds equally in a new house together. However, this time Mrs. Bloggs is advised that her old will is invalid and she makes a new one. Mr. Young, who also has children of his own from his previous marriage, also writes a will. Naturally, whoever dies first would not want to leave the survivor homeless. So in both their wills, they leave everything to each other in the first place and specify that if they die second, the estate is divided equally between Mrs. Bloggs' children and Mr. Young's children, which seems fair and logical. Therefore, when Mrs. Bloggs unfortunately passes away before Mr. Young, he initially inherits everything, including Mrs. Bloggs' share of the house. As time passes, Mr. Young loses touch with his stepchildren, Jack and Jill, and is persuaded by his own children to write a new will benefiting them only 100%. So, when Mr. Young dies, Jack and Jill again end up with nothing. So, having a standard will does not prevent the possibility of your children being disinherited if your partner remarries or changes their will after you have gone. So what can be done? Let's go back to the start when we first met Mr. and Mrs. Bloggs. This time they are determined to safeguard the family home as best they can. So rather than write standard wills, they make property protection trust wills. This is how they work. Firstly, if necessary, we make a technical adjustment to the ownership of the property, so they own a distinct 50% each. In each of their wills, they state that their share of the property goes into trust for their children. So this time, when Mr. Bloggs passes away first, the survivor, Mrs. Bloggs, now owns half the property in her name and the other half is owned by the trust. However, Mrs. Bloggs has a life interest in that trust, meaning she can continue to live in and use the whole house rent-free for the rest of her life. But what this trust arrangement means is that after his passing, Mr. Bloggs' half share of the house is ring-fenced for the children. If Mrs. Bloggs remarries or changes her will, his share of the property is still guaranteed to pass to his children on her death. Furthermore, if Mrs. Bloggs needs care after he is gone, his share of the property is not owned by Mrs. Bloggs and therefore cannot be used to pay for her care fees, so is protected for the children. Naturally, we have used straightforward examples here, but the same principles apply to all joint property owners. Whether your home is large or small, mortgaged or mortgage-free, whether you're married or unmarried, and whether you both have the same children or different children from previous relationships, in which case property protection trust wills may be even more relevant.